The woods stood silent. Ancient trees clawed at the pale moon, their branches twisted like arthritic fingers. This was the heart of the Whispering Woods, a place where shadows stretched long and the air hung heavy with dread. No birds sang here. Only the rustle of unseen things in the undergrowth broke the silence. The very air seemed to whisper, carrying secrets best left buried. The moon offered little comfort. Its light, normally so comforting, seemed to warp and twist within the dense canopy. It became a source of fear, illuminating not the path ahead, but the gnarled ancient trees that lined it. Each one seemed to watch, to judge, their bark scarred with the memories of countless nights like this. Locals spoke of the woods in hushed tones, their voices laced with fear. They told tales of those who wandered in, never to be seen again, their laughter, once bright and full of life, forever silenced by the wood's embrace. The stories were just that, stories. Or so Ellie and her friends believed. Tonight, they were determined to prove the legends wrong. Ellie, ever the skeptic, led the way. Her flashlight cut a thin beam through the oppressive darkness. Beside her walked Ben, his face a mask of forced bravado. Bringing up the rear was Julie, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and excitement. She clutched a silver crucifix, a silent prayer escaping her lips. "See?" Ellie said, her voice artificially loud in the stillness. "Just a bunch of trees, nothing to be scared of." She laughed, but the sound was hollow, quickly swallowed by the oppressive silence that surrounded them. Even Ellie couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching them, its unseen eyes boring into the back of her neck. Ben chuckled nervously. "Yeah, just like old Mrs. Henderson's dentures about to jump out and bite us." He tried to make light of the situation, but his voice trembled slightly, betraying his true feelings. The woods had a way of doing that, of stripping away pretense and exposing the raw fear beneath. Julie didn't reply, her gaze darting from shadow to shadow. The crucifix felt cold in her hand, a stark contrast to the sweat that clung to her palm. The deeper they ventured into the woods, the heavier the air grew. It was as if the very oxygen had turned to dread, each breath a struggle. A faint sound drifted through the trees. A whisper, barely audible, yet filled with a chilling age. Ellie stopped, her blood turning to ice. The whisper seemed to coil around them, slithering through the trees on a non-existent breeze. It was a sound devoid of any human warmth, cold and ancient like the grave. "Did you hear that?" Ben whispered, his voice tight with fear. He looked around, his flashlight beam dancing erratically across the gnarled trunks. The shadows seemed to writhe and twist, taking on monstrous forms in his panicked gaze. The laughter had long since died in his throat, replaced by a primal fear he couldn't quite place. "It's just the wind," Ellie said, but her voice lacked conviction. The sound had been too distinct, too filled with malice to be the wind. It was a language she didn't understand, but her instincts screamed at her to run, to escape the suffocating embrace of the woods. Julie remained silent, her grip on the crucifix tightening. The whispers seemed to grow louder around them, swirling like a vortex of despair. They were no longer words, but a chilling symphony of despair, a chorus of the damned rising from the very earth beneath their feet. The flashlight flickered, once, twice, then died, plunging them into absolute darkness. Panic seized Ellie. She fumbled for the switch, her heart pounding against her ribs like a drum. The darkness seemed to press in on them, suffocating, alive. It was a darkness so complete it felt like a physical presence, wrapping around them like a shroud. "No, no, no," Ben stammered, his voice high-pitched with terror. He shook his flashlight, but the bulb remained stubbornly unlit. The darkness seemed to amplify the whispers, transforming them into rasping breaths that seemed to brush against their skin. Julie whimpered, her hand instinctively reaching for Ellie's. The crucifix slipped from her grasp, disappearing into the undergrowth with a soft thud. The sound seemed deafening in the sudden silence, echoing through the trees like a death knell. They were alone, lost in a darkness far older and deeper than any they had known before. Fear, raw and primal, took root in Ellie's stomach. The darkness was no longer just an absence of light. It felt sentient, malevolent, aware of their presence, and it was hungry. Section 5. Faces in the Fog. A low fog began to creep through the trees, as if the forest itself was exhaling a breath of decay. And through the swirling grey, shapes began to emerge, faces pale and gaunt, with eyes that glowed with an unnatural light. They floated in the mist, their expressions twisted in silent screams of torment. They were not alive, not in any sense Ellie could comprehend. They were echoes of fear, given form by the darkness and the fog. "Oh God," Ben breathed, his voice barely a whisper. He stumbled backward, tripping over a gnarled root and falling to the forest floor. The ghostly figures seemed to drift closer, drawn to their terror like moths to a flame. Their eyes burned with a cold, hungry light, reflecting not the moonlight but something far more ancient and evil. Ellie wanted to scream, but terror had stolen her voice. She could only watch in horrified fascination as the spectral figures drew closer, their forms shifting and swirling like flames in the wind. They reached for them with long skeletal fingers, their touch promising not violence, but an eternity of suffering. Julie, her eyes wide with terror, scrambled backward until her back hit the rough bark of a tree. She closed her eyes, her lips moving in a silent prayer. The crucifix was gone, lost in the darkness, and she was utterly alone at the mercy of whatever horrors lurked in the heart of the whispering woods. The whispers returned, louder now, filled with a chilling amusement. They seemed to mock their terror, to revel in their despair. They were no longer content to simply observe, to torment from a distance. Now they were hunters, toying with their prey before moving in for the kill. Ellie grabbed Ben's arm, hauling him to his feet. "We have to go now," she yelled, her voice barely audible above the cacophony of whispers. She didn't know where they were going, only that they had to get away, to escape the suffocating embrace of the woods. They ran blindly, desperately, their lungs burning with exertion. The forest floor seemed to shift and sway beneath their feet, as if the very ground beneath them was alive. Tree branches reached out like skeletal arms, trying to snag them, to hold them within the wood's deadly embrace forever. But still, they ran, fueled by pure, primal terror. The whispers followed, relentless, mocking. They seemed to be everywhere and nowhere, echoing all around them, urging them onward, deeper into the heart of the darkness. They burst out of the woods, stumbling into a clearing bathed in the pale moonlight. The ghostly figures didn't follow. They remained within the trees, their forms barely visible through the swirling fog. They seemed to watch, to wait, as if knowing that their escape was only temporary. Ellie collapsed to her knees, gasping for breath. Her lungs burned and her legs felt like lead, but she had never been so grateful to see the open sky, to feel the caress of the cool night air on her skin. Beside her, Ben lay sprawled on the ground, his chest heaving. "Julie?" Ellie whispered, her voice hoarse. She looked around frantically, but her friend was nowhere to be seen. Panic surged through her anew. Had Julie not escaped the woods? Was she still trapped within that nightmare realm, at the mercy of whatever horrors lurked within? "Julie!" Ellie screamed, her voice raw with terror. She scrambled to her feet, ready to plunge back into the darkness, to face the unknown horrors once again if it meant saving her friend. But Ben grabbed her arm, his grip surprisingly strong. "It's no use," he gasped, his voice shaky. "We have to go. We have to get help." He pulled her away from the woods, his eyes filled with a terror that mirrored her own. But it was more than fear that Ellie saw in his gaze. It was understanding, as if he knew something she didn't. They ran until they reached the road, their breath coming in ragged gasps. Headlights appeared in the distance, growing ever closer. Ellie raised her hand to flag down the approaching car, relief flooding through her. They were safe. They had escaped the nightmare. The car screeched to a halt beside them. The driver, a young man with kind eyes and a worried frown, leaned out the window. "Are you two all right? You look like you've seen a ghost." He chuckled nervously, but the laughter died in his throat as he took in their pale faces and wide, haunted eyes. "It's Julie," Ellie said, her voice trembling. "We need to go back. She's still in the woods." But even as she spoke, a chilling certainty settled over her. Julie wasn't lost, not in the way they thought. The driver's smile faded, replaced by an expression of grim understanding. He didn't need to ask who Julie was or what awaited them within the tangled depths of the whispering woods. He had heard the stories, the whispers that clung to the town like cobwebs after a storm. Julie emerged from the tree line, her face illuminated by the car's headlights. She walked towards them, her movements slow and deliberate as if in a trance. Her eyes, once filled with fear, now shone with an unnatural light, the same cold, eerie glow that had haunted the faces in the fog. "It's okay," Julie said, her voice empty, devoid of any emotion. "The woods, they remember me now." She smiled, a chilling, empty expression that sent shivers down Ellie's spine. The Whispering Woods didn't just claim its victims. Sometimes it made them its own. As they drove away, Ellie couldn't shake the feeling that they hadn't escaped at all. The woods had let them go for now, but they were watching, waiting, and they would be back for Julie. The Whispering Woods always claimed what they were owed.